Okay. Once again. All right. So the title of this week's paper was obviously Personalized Nutrition Based on Your Genes. Is this fat loss science or another scam? This was in Body by Science, again by Bill Campbell. And the study that they reviewed was actually titled The Personalized Nutrition Study, also called POINTS, Evaluation of a Genetically Informed Weight Loss Approach, a Randomized Clinical Trial by Hochsmann et al. From last year, 2023. So their thoughts were, um, well, obviously, we all agree that personalized nutrition is the future, but how far do we go with this? Does that apply to genes, etc., blood type, whatever other diet and trends are out there? Generally speaking, nutrigenomics is the scientific study of the interaction of nutrition and genes, especially concerning the prevention or treatment of disease. Some evidence suggests that people metabolize carbs and fats differently based on their genetic makeup. How can we use this to help people lose fat, considering that calories and protein matter the most? Basically, by combining genetics, nutrition, and molecular biology, researchers aim to understand how individual genetic variations influence a person's response to nutrients, food components, and dietary patterns. Oh, yeah. So for the method of the study, they had 122 overweight and obese subjects, 102 females and 20 males, notably. The average age was 54, so kind of a little bit higher. Each subject had to complete a genealogy test prior, so one from Ancestry and one from 23andMe. The researchers also tested the hypothesis that participants assigned to a diet corresponding to their prior determined genotype would lose more weight over the course of 12 weeks than those assigned to a diet discordant, so not aligned for their genotype. And basically, when it comes to the genetics, there were 10 genes and the location of their polymorphism that were used to identify and place the subjects into the respective fat responsive or carbohydrate responsive genotype groups. We won't go through all the various names because they are very long and weird. But the carbohydrate responsive dieting group, in theory, would be the group that when placed on a weight loss diet that prioritizes carbohydrates, these subjects should lose more body fat because they are following a genetically favorable diet. Then there was also the fat responsive dieting group. So in theory, when placed on a weight loss diet that prioritizes dietary fats, these subjects should lose more body fat because they are following a genetically favorable diet. So basically what they did is they had 4 groups, one with the fat responders that received a high-fat diet, so they should hypothetically lose more body weight, they call body weight or fat. The second group, fat responders that received a high carbohydrate diet that should hypothetically lose less body weight. Then the third group, carbohydrate responders that received a high carb diet also should lose more weight. And then a carbohydrate responders group that received a high fat diet. The high carbohydrate diet was rich in whole grain foods and comprised 65% of carbs and 20% fats. The high fat diet was rich in unsaturated fats and oils and contained 40% fat and 45% carbohydrates. Both diets provided 15% of energy from protein. So just the note that there was whole grain focus and an unsaturated fat focus indicates that both diets should hypothetically be considered healthy, so to speak. And they placed the subjects in a 750 calorie deficit, so quite substantial. And they gave them a meal plan to self-prepare meals during the 12 weeks with a scale and tracking and no exercise intervention. Those with other genotypes, so that were not in those 10, in that category of 10, they were excluded from participating throughout the initial screening, which I think is quite important to note because not everyone might have fallen, or otherwise they might be in a category and skew the results. So the results were basically, first they measured the following variables: body fat percentage and weight via bioelectrical impedance, as well as blood pressure and metabolic health markers at the beginning and at the end of the study. So the fat responders, which were 85 persons out of the 122, on a high fat diet, on a high fat diet lost 12 pounds, and on a high carb diet lost 11.5 pounds. So that's not a statistically significant difference. The carb responders, which were only 37 in total, the ones on a high carb diet lost 11 pounds, and the ones on a high fat diet lost 9 pounds. So again, 2-pound difference over the course of 12 weeks, not statistically significant, or not a statistical significant difference. Can't talk. So overall, there was a lot of variation between the subjects and a low participant number that was kind of, or a low participant number in the carbohydrate group that was noted as one of the weaknesses of the study. Their conclusion was basically a DNA-based diet is not backed up by science. Bill Campbell also noted that he really didn't trust the body fat percentage measurements. I mean, we've spoken about bioelectric impedance measures multiple times. I'm totally with him. He said that it was very, very doubtful that the carbohydrate group on a high fat diet actually gained 1.5% of body fat and lost nearly all their weight in lean tissue. That's, yeah, next to impossible. And while he's not opposed to bioelectrical impedance devices in general, he has not heard of the brand that they used before and believe that these machines are even less accurate in extremes of body fat or for very lean individuals also. No details at all were given regarding when or how the measurements were obtained. So it could have been in the middle of the day one time, it could have been in the afternoon, could have been while they were in a fed state, could have been after training. So all this could have hugely skewed the results. So also there were no differences between the DNA-based diets for blood pressure and metabolic health markers, so fasting glucose, fasting insulin, HOMA-IR during the entire study. So again, his conclusion is not only is there no benefit for eating a diet based on your genes to help with weight loss, but there also does not appear to be a specialized diet based on your genes that will improve clinical health markers. So again, his limitation would be that the body composition data does not make sense. And my thoughts were, okay, cool, 12 weeks, but they prepared all the meals themselves during that time. So I would be kind of like, okay, how accurate or how dialed in were they actually? I can imagine that not everyone completely adhered to the 750 calorie deficit during this time or to the meal plan for that matter. You know, even if they were within their calories, they might have said like, oh, I crave something different. And my main thought was that the high fat diet, I didn't even think was really high fat, to be entirely honest. What was it again? It was like 40% fat. Like for me, that's not really a high fat diet. That's like moderate in my opinion, right? I don't know. Like if I compare two very different things, I would, as a researcher, try to make sure that it's like quite obvious the difference. You know, if it would have been like 65% carbs and in the one scenario and then in the other scenario 65% fat, that would make a lot more sense for me. So that's really the main issue that I have with the whole study design, because to me that's not really a high fat diet. But yeah, anyway, let's move on to some other coaches' thoughts. So Sue Bush was mentioned here, or was contributing here. She said that we need to differentiate between optimal and optimal for the client or client's consistency. And I mean, we've spoken about this numerous times also. Just because something hypothetically might agree with someone's blood type or whatever, maybe they're craving other things, or maybe one day they want to eat out and whatever. Like, we do need to differentiate between those two scenarios, and then also consider how close to their target does a client usually get, and what are their favorite foods. So we do that, and I'm sure, Mike, you do that as well when you have your initial food intake or your initial client intake, like asking them what they like, but also looking through their diary from over several days to kind of detect a pattern. Okay, this person clearly loves fats, and they love nut butter and salmon and avocado and whatever, and the other person might just like always gravitate towards potatoes, rice, and bread, or they might just flat out say that as well. um so Sue says she usually does a deficit of 10 to 20% in a cut, and keeps protein at 1 gram per pound or higher, and fats at 40 grams or higher. That's kind of her standard setup, nothing super new here. She also mentioned we need to discuss with the client, not just telling them all kinds of things, and educate them, and take health limitations such as blood sugar issues into consideration. The other coaches thought, so Philip Pape, it's a good aim for weight loss might be losing about 0.5 to 0.75% of body weight per week, which will likely require regular calorie adjustments. Some clients might enjoy calorie ranges for a minimum, and I think that that's a really good point, for long-term adherence, as we've spoken about, not being super pedantic about macros, especially not about carbs and fats. I think for many, many people, just tracking calories and protein works really well. But yeah, that was kind of it. I'm interested to hear your guys' thoughts and impressions on the paper.
I'll go. Just off of the back of one of your points, Lisa, about adherence, and I don't know if the actual paper reported it or not, but I would have been really interested to see, because I think they checked the client's adherence via 7-day reporting or something.
Something like that.
Yeah, so it would have been interested to see like what adherence rates were reported as or something like that, because again, that could have made a massive difference potentially.
Yeah,
Um,
totally. And I mean, to the point that Melissa made last week or the week before, when we talked about Menno's sheet of like multiple questions, even if there's just one or two questions in regards to adherence, it's very likely that they still might have rated themselves higher than what they actually were.
yeah,
It
exactly.
really depends how they ask. If you
Yeah.
if you directly ask, did you adhere to the diet? The answer is yes.
Mm-hmm.
In most of the cases, like
Mm-hmm.
unless they are blatantly like, no, I don't give a fuck, and just like, I don't care. But most of the people is gonna answer yes. So that's why he tears down the questions to like, did you adhere to the diet on Monday, on Tuesday, on Wednesday? And then you begin thinking like, oh well, actually on Friday I went for pizza night, so maybe I didn't. So I think it really depends how you ask. And my question was, when you mention a high fat diet, which I have never had. So if you have a 60% of your calories coming out of fat, and because of the caloric density of fat, you get a small volume of food.
Of course, they
Like you get
might
a
be
smaller
hungrier.
volume because of the density, caloric density. So aren't you hungrier because of like volume? I know that it slows the transit through the digestive system, but since you have a smaller quantity in your stomach and you have pressure sensors, I would imagine that such a diet would leave you feeling hungry because of
That's
that?
a really good point, and I think that's a big discussion point in general. Like you hear it more and more on other podcasts and stuff as well, where the opinions and experiences are really split because some people that go on a keto diet, which keto would be even higher than 65% or somewhere close to that, but even higher. And many people say they actually feel more satiated with that. Now, for me personally, would 100% believe I've never been on keto, but I would 100% believe that I would be very hungry because I too, like when I have less food volume and so on, I don't, fats don't satiate me as much as carbs. But there are certain people that say when they do keto or carnivore or whatever, they feel really satiated because for them, fats, which also slow down absorption and processing and stuff, that makes them feel a lot more satiated. I don't know about you guys, Laura or Mike, what your experiences are with that, but yeah, I hear
Maybe it's a genetic
very
thing.
split opinions. But I mean, scientifically speaking, hypothetically, I do think that carbs should be more satiating, but clearly we hear different things as well.
It might be genetic.
Exactly,
Coming to
to
the
this
point,
point.
like
Yeah.
there are some genes that are related with satiety, and it might be that the expression of those genes is different, so the people feel more satisfied with fat or with carbohydrates. I can't imagine. I don't know. I
100%.
could probably think in any scenario with that would actually make sense.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think you're got a good point there.
That was one of the things that popped up for me when I was reading this was, again, we shared our satiety with, I feel more satiated when I have more carbohydrates, and I know that higher fat, like a higher fat diet does not fill me up. So that was one of the things. And then it was also when we talked to when we refer to the meals themselves, how were they distributed? Because sometimes it's easier to measure like carbohydrates than fats. So there was that discrepancy that kind of came up for me as well when I was taking note of this. So those were kind of like the top two thoughts for me.
That's a really good point, especially the second one I didn't even consider, but particularly since they were on a meal plan or like preparing their own meals, some people it might just say beef or whatever, and then the one person has like a flank steak, and then the other person actually has like a rib eye with a lot more. Like I could just imagine, if you're someone
Don't
who
they tell you a steak of like 8 ounces or something if they gave them a scale?
they gave them
Shouldn't they?
scale.
So the meal plan should say like steak of X grams or ounces, right?
I would assume the quantity for sure, but I mean, I could just imagine if you're someone who's new to this whole tracking and making a meal plan, like, I mean, they're obese and overweight individuals that they probably read steak of beef and then in brackets top sirloin or whatever, and then they might just be like, oh, well, I've got a flank steak at home, I'll just use that. Like that's just my maybe they take it much
Yeah,
more
I
seriously than
understand.
that, but
I
yeah.
thought that you thought that they didn't put quantities in the meal
Oh
plan, and I
no,
thought,
no, no, I do
well,
think
that's stupid.
quantity for
I
sure.
mean, people might not have completely filled the prescription, or what I could imagine is that you buy a package and the package contains I'm gonna make it up, 800 grams of steak, and you're prescribed a 600-gram piece of meat, and you're like, okay, what I'm gonna do with the rest of the 200? I'm just gonna eat it. Might as well. There is something that came to my attention when you said about the distribution of the groups, and it was about the population genetics. As this group was not previously selected, so they selected the people, if I understood correctly, and then they were genetically tested. So that means that these people were a subset of the population, so a sample. And that would indicate to me that within the population, the majority are fat responders.
That's a good point. Yeah, according to this, if
I mean, if they took this number of people that had to be whatever, healthy, blah, 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 and after that they were genetically tested and they had, I don't know, 150 in total, 120. And from these percentages might it can be skewed, but it might represent what it happens in the population in the United States in that area. So it indicates genetic makeup of the population.
I'm glad that you added the in the US in that area, because again,
Oh, I
as
am
we know,
Latina and I am a
exactly.
female, and we work in genetics. So we are trying to fight that, because all the medications, drugs, standards of care in healthcare are developed for the Caucasian white male.
Mhm.
And I am
Mhm.
a female from Latino origin, and stuff doesn't work for us.
Mhm. Yeah.
So we fight against that. And the project I currently work on, side note, is trying to study the genetic makeup of Parkinson in populations that have not been studied yet. So we get samples from Africa, from Asia, from countries that I don't even know where they are in the map. And we do genetics to see which genes they have. So I actually do the preparation to detect SNPs in Parkinson's in populations that have not been studied yet, because all the search for medication that is happening right now in neurodegenerative diseases is for a Caucasian white male.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, that's first of all a little bit upsetting, but it is what it is. At least we're making progress and working on,
Yeah,
well, maybe not reversing, but improving that.
improving that, like
Yeah.
trying to fix the errors that we've made in the past, also with females. So now it's mandatory to certain extent that when you do experiments with animals, you also include females,
Mm-hmm.
because females were up until very recently excluded from the experiments
Yeah.
because
I
they
mean,
have a cycle, and
makes
it
it more
complicates.
difficult.
It is really complicated, because it is the result because of the drug or because she was ovulating.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It adds another layer of complexity, but that's how females are. We are about 50% of the population, so it's fair that we are also studied.
Yeah,
Sorry, I
like I shared the podcast this week in the group. If anyone ever has the time to listen to it, I thought it was a
I
really
did it.
great.
It
Oh,
was
good.
really, really good. Yeah.
Yeah,
Took me
she's
3 days, but I did it.
well done. And I mean, she specifically touches on that point also, right? That there was or still is an underrepresentation of females in studies in
Yeah,
terms
and
of,
actually, Huberman is the one who answered her that now for the NIH,
ah, yes,
there is this requirement of having females.
right. Tammy, you were going to say something?
I was actually surprised by how relatively little number of studies of the perimenopause and menopause there were compared to, all the other stuff out there. I would think that given, I mean, it's no surprise we have a cycle. So,
We are
something
irrelevant.
it's not something that's, recently developed. So I was super surprised that there was not as much research done. So I really like that the doctor was talking about how there's going to be funding or whatever more for WHI and stuff, so I was happy to hear that.
Absolutely. And I mean, just
Wasn't
generally
shocking.
awareness. But one point that shocked me there also was that she said that she believes only maybe 10% of OBGYNs or general like practitioners nowadays are more alert to like, hey, this is not an illness, or like being on menopause is not something horrible, and going on HRT or whatever, helping with hormones is not a bad thing. That old revised study from NIH, or was it NIH? No, I don't not NIH, WHI,
Okay.
that is not applicable anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Tammy, I think one of the things that she highlighted, and I found it striking, is like, well, striking. It's just a realization. We are not useful after we have kids. It's
Mm.
like, oh well, she had kids. They are grown up. Who cares about the rest of her life? Like, she's not useful anymore. Can be discarded. So it's not. There is no reason to study it. There are no researchers studying, and it's
that's
extremely
really,
taboo.
yeah, and it's really interesting because I am the type who I never had kids. I'm a great aunt, but I just don't have that maternal I mean, put a dog in front of me and yeah, I'm going to be all maternal about that. But it was a little bit, disconcerting realizing that like, hey, after someone has kids, they're not useful anymore. But then what about the population like me who chose not to have any kids because I'm selfish, but whatever.
Not
You
interesting
know what
for
I mean?
society. Your genes will not be
Right.
spread, so there is no need to take care of you. It's as that.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
thankfully there are people changing that like like that lady. So yeah. If you guys haven't listened to it yet, Mike or Laura, I definitely recommend it in any case.
It
I
is
enjoyed
really
it.
good.
And especially because next month I actually have I've been looking for like a perimenopause menopause specialist to work with, and next month I have my first consult with her. So
Oh, I'm
I'm
very interested to hear how that goes. And like for you to find out, because I mean, she came from recommendation, right? So like for you to find out, okay, is she actually, aware of the newer things and open to to various methods, etc. So yeah, I'm excited to hear about it.
yeah, I'll definitely share. But
Awesome.
I did a test this week and it didn't go well. I had a standard mammography test this week for the first time in my life, and therefore I was seen by a gynecologist after the test, directly after. So I say, well, I have pain, and I just tested because I was listening to the podcast. Like, could this be related to the menopause or like something? I'm like, no, that's too early. You're 44. Nah, absolutely nothing to do. This is completely normal. I'm like,
What?
yep, that's what she meant. Exactly that. And he was extremely old.
Wow. Just
So no,
completely dismissed even the possibility. Wow.
no, this pain that you have is absolutely normal. I just did an ultrasound, a mammography. Everything looks normal. You're fine. 20 minutes and you're out.
Okay, do not
So
rely on this person's opinion. That's for sure. But yeah, I mean, did you guys also think that 60, no, what was it, 40% is not actually that high in fat, or was that just something that sprung out on me? At me?
that's not that high.
Yeah, I think
Yeah, I didn't think that was that high.
I mean,
agreed.
overall, especially even or like considering protein is pretty low, it's really not that much. Like let's say they're on 2000, well, they're probably not on 2000 calories, but on 1500 calories or something like that. What would that be? Let me do the math. I don't know, maybe like 80 grams of fat or whatever, but that's not super high in my opinion. So yeah, anyway. But
Another question. Why
yeah,
why is the deficit 750 calories? Like it should be a percentage.
yeah, I have to
So if
say,
they have a gigantic person, 750 calories might not be a lot. If you put me in a 750 calorie
mhm.
deficit and my maintenance is like 100 and 5,000, then I am in 750 calories per day.
Yeah,
So
let's hope not. Well, I mean, I have to admit, I didn't read up on how they determined their
it
maintenance in
wasn't
the
in the
first.
paper.
It wasn't in the paper. Okay, right. Because I mean, okay, let's say that they're all obese and overweight, so they probably estimated their maintenance to be reasonably high. But yeah, I no that I mean that's a bit of a red flag that they didn't put that in there, how they calculated the
Well,
maintenance.
okay, that's the review. I didn't go to the source, to be
Right.
honest.
But
So
neither did
maybe in
I.
the paper. Yeah.
Yeah. Neither did I. But yeah, any last thoughts on this review? No? Okay, cool.
I found it extremely interesting. And
Yeah,
when I
absolutely.
began reading, I was like, we are not there yet. If it is interesting for you guys to know, we are there yet with other diseases, but
Mm.
not with carbs and fats. So, for example, for one of the neurodegenerative diseases we work with, you can test the patients and see if they have this SNP. And if they have this SNP, then they actually respond to this medication. If
Mm.
they don't have it, don't bother giving them the medication because they will not respond since the medication blocks the product of that gene. And that gene, when it doesn't have the SNP, doesn't produce the protein that is blocked by the medication. So
Interesting.
for neurodegeneration, we are there. It's just that it's extremely personalized. And it happens like in Germany, where you
Yeah.
go to the doctor and you happen to have a good doctor. Then he sends you for genetic testing to, for example, my institute or a commercial lab, and then you get tested and they give you the SNPs that are relevant for the medication. So this is current and it does happen, but it's very tailored. So
Right.
it doesn't happen in a gigantic population scale.
But I mean, it's good to know that
So
for certain diseases where it's like
yes,
perhaps
yes.
critical, right? That is the case.
So we are there in these areas, but certainly I never read anything saying that we are there in nutrition in that level. So whenever someone says like hijacking your metabolism or nutrigenomics, I'm like, let's
Well,
see what you tell me.
exactly, or things like the blood type diet and stuff. I think we read a paper on the blood type diet whereas
Makes
yeah,
me sick.
yeah. So, oh, okay, you should only be eating Mediterranean because you're A plus, and now you're B, so you should be eating keto, and like, yeah, whatever.
These people really, really, really have no clue. Like, for
Yeah, no.
example, in Honduras, like 95% of the population is O positive. And if that corresponds to Mediterranean diet, I'm sorry, you live in Honduras. We don't have olives. Eat bananas.
That's such a
Bananas and coffees, rice and beans, that's what we eat. So that's why we are all obese. Has nothing to do with calories. It's because we do not eat a Mediterranean diet since we live in the Caribbean.
Oh, funny. But yeah, in regards to my homework for this week, where I said I would love to hear your favorite book or two, and who would like to go ahead and start with that?
Oh, sure, I'll go.
Yes.
Brene Brown, The Gifts of Imperfection. So I kind of go through this in cycles. I read something and then it stands out. I'm sure you guys have all had that experience where you kind of pick up a book and there are some things that resonate in that period of time. And then you read it again and you pick something else up from it. So it was, I know the first time that I read half of it and I was like, and that was online. I need to get the physical copy and then kind of read through it. It's more, and I think some of us in the room can relate to the perfectionism and kind of where it stems from. And we desire this, we have this innate desire for connection. And part of that is we want to, morph ourselves into the group that we think we will connect with, but we have to morph ourselves rather than being our true authentic self. So again, it's something that it's kind of seasonal in the sense of like I pick up things depending on where I am in my life. And I just found that it's been a really impactful and informative and also a book that's just really helpful.
Oh, awesome. Thank you for sharing that. I mean, I love Brene Brown. I've never read this book before, but that's great to know. And I totally know Mike and I've spoke about this before, that there's like certain books that during different times of your life you take different things away from them. I mean, just like movies, there's different things, and but as you said also, like different parts just speak to you differently. And I think it's always like what you're ready to hear or what you're ready to acknowledge. Like with obviously we're growing, or hopefully we're growing every year, so that version of you from 5 or 10 years ago is gonna hear something completely different than you today. So thank you.
Yeah, you betcha.
And on that note, actually, so there's a quote that says, "No person steps in the same river twice." And it just goes to mean that every time we go back to something, we're seeing things with a different perspective. And that's why they always recommend, you should go back and reread books because you're probably going to see it with a totally different perspective. So totally makes sense. But for me, so I guess when I was thinking about this, I've kind of got two books, mainly because there was one which was the first kind of non-fiction personal development book that influenced me the most, and that was Stephen Covey's The 7 Habits of Highly Successful People. And that was kind of like the first book that I read that it really just resonated with me. It really kind of sunk in, and that kind of really set things in motion for me, I guess, a lot. So that was kind of like my book. And again, it's something which, I probably should go back to it more often because I haven't read it in a little while. But it it seems so practical, it makes sense, and it's like, oh yeah, this is great. So that was that. And then the second book for me, which I felt I kind of had to mention a little bit of, is The Daily Stoic by Ryan Holiday. Just because, again, it's just, I read it a page a day, and I've probably just read it continuously now for like 3 or 4 years. And I think it's, again, it's so good because you're repeating it and you're reading it, it just sinks in. And I think it's just such a easy but effective way of kind of making personal development and just a good thinking process and perspective part of your daily life. So I'd probably kind of say those two.
I love it. Well, actually, the 7 habits of highly effective people, that was, I almost put that as one of my 2. It's on my 3rd list because it's so good. And I mean, it's so applicable, even though he wrote it, was in like the 80s or something like that, like a while ago. But yeah, absolutely, like still applies to anybody who is highly effective or successful now, I believe. And yeah, the Daily Stoic, I think sometimes it's almost like a mantra for the day, right? Like it's, I mean, some people read Bible verses or whatever, or other mantras, but it's like, oh, hey, just a reminder, you're mortal. Okay, cool. So you can think about that all day long. And then the next day you have another reminder of like, hey, just focus on doing your best. And that's good. So yeah, I love it. Thanks for sharing.
No worries.
What about you, Melissa?
I could remain muted. I usually don't read self-development books. So the closer to self-development that I have read is the book of Meno. I'm trying to remember the name. Something
the
like
science of
the science self-control.
Yes, yeah.
The science of self-control. So that one I read recently. It was a repetition of what we had in the module of adherence. So I was like, and I bought the book. I, of course, didn't know that it was the same that he put in the module. I did like it. He sees the brain as it is a gigantic elephant who wants instant gratification. And there is a rider who is the frontal lobe, which is what I understand, that is trying to constrain it and say, okay, no, wait. I know you want now to have that gigantic tub of ice cream, but think in the future, you actually want to be lean. But the elephant has no vision of the future. So the whole book is about how to manage that the rider can take control of the elephant, which is your instinctive brain. So he gives you a lot of practical tips on how to diet, how to exercise. So it's really practical for people who has no experience with these. And I did like it. I found it useful. I wouldn't say it's my favorite book on earth because I don't really like those kind of books, but it was good and very practical and very actionable to make you more effective and to. And one of the things that I really, really like that comes to my mind now was some kind, he calls him the law of something. I think it's called the law of Parkinson, that a task takes as much time as you have to perform it. So if you have to do, I don't know, a workout and you only have 45 minutes because you have to take a plane, you actually make it happen in 45 minutes. But if you're all relaxed and there's nothing else to do, you can do the same workout in 1.5 hours. And these came to me like, this is actually true. So if you wake up late in the morning, you do all your stuff.
Yep.
In these 20 minutes. If you wake up on time, you do it in 1.5 hours, and you're late anyway. So
that's so true.
that was interesting to me. That phrase actually
very
stood
cool.
out.
Well, to me it sounds like it could be something similar to like with new clients I often give the recommendation of like Atomic Habits, but this could be another book to like recommend to people new to just any kind of change.
Yeah, and it is very, very practical. So it's like tips and for eating out, for working out, for like how to plan ahead if you know that your elephant is always like you arrive home and you all the typical stuff that we always talk about. but in an organized way. So I think it's good to recommend to clients and easy to read also.
Awesome. Mike, you were going to say something. Sorry, I cut you off.
It wasn't that important, but I just thought for the sake of maybe thoughtful disagreement, I kind of do and don't agree with that, with that statement about a task takes as long. It makes sense, but like in the example of like say a workout, say you do it in 45 minutes, the quality of that workout would change. It could be better, it could be worse, because essentially like if you're shortening a task to try and fit it into whatever time frame that you've got, you're turning a workout from maybe a strength workout into a high intensity workout. And so it totally changes the quality of the task. And again, like you could do something else, like if you had to write an essay or write an article, sure, you could do it in half an hour, but the quality might not be as good, or it could be better. So
That's good. That's a really good point. Sometimes, but especially some people, they need time pressure, right? Like if you're like, oh, you've got to write a book in 3 years. Many people are not, or within the next 3 years, many people are not going to start for the next 2.5 years, and you then work much better with that pressure. But other people, they're like, oh, I prefer to write like a page whenever I feel like it, and so yeah, it very dependent.
I think, Mike, that was a really, really clever observation. I would add to that all that, so the law would be true up to a certain threshold. So if you have a workout that your trainer thought about it in a 50 minutes workout, you can actually make it in 45 for sure. But if it was designed for 1 hour and you're doing it in half an hour, you're really not, form will not be great. So yes, I agree with that within a limit, there is a threshold for that. So same as you can write an essay in half an hour, but it will not be as deep. You will not reflect that much. You would get it done, but probably, as you say, the quality. That was really clever. Thanks.
Well, Tammy, what is your favorite book, or a couple of your favorite books?
Actually, I have two. One, oh my gosh, I'm sorry about the dog. There's this, have you guys heard of the holistic psychologist on Instagram? Dr. Nicola Pura. She's fantastic, and she came out with a book called How to Be the Love You Seek. It's really, really good. It's one of my favorite books that I've read in all of my self-development books that I've read. It talks about trauma bonds that you have basically lived through as a kid, right? And then from those trauma bonds, how it affects your relationships as adults. So it affects how you treat or how you receive love, how you treat your significant other. I mean, just because I'm divorced, I was really interested in all of these kind of relationship bondings and stuff, aside from like the 5 love languages. This is the second book that I have found very illuminating in explaining how the things that you've gone through as a child and how the expectations that you put on your parents or your parents put on you affect how you respond and you show love in the future in adult relationships. But she goes through like a very comprehensive evaluation of and discussion of how these trauma bonds from your childhood affect your nervous system and how it can affect you in the future. And there was like, I think chapter 13 talks about like the importance of nutrition, all the pillars of health, and how that can actually help you become healthier adults emotionally and mentally. So this book was amazing. And
it really sounds very all conclusive. Yeah. Or
very, very, yeah. And so I was actually surprised she took on the nutrition side, because she's a clinical psychologist, PhD, nothing with nutrition. And I was listening intently, and she basically just got everything. And she discussed her own experiences with the trauma bonds, and then how she started implementing all these nutrition habits, getting movement in, everything, and how it has made her a better person. And so she talks about her own experiences to make it very relatable. So it's an amazing book.
How to Be the Love That You Seek, or what was it called? Okay,
How to Be the Love You Seek by Dr. Nicole LaPura.
Awesome. This because you touched on like attachment something or trauma bonding. Is it
Mhm.
a little bit similar to attachment theory? Do you know, or is it like something very different?
I read about the attachment theory. It's a little bit different. It overlaps.
Some similar. Oh, okay, yeah, gotcha,
Yes, it
gotcha.
overlaps, but it's a
Okay,
little different. So
okay.
that's
I guess I just have to read it.
one of my favorite self-development books. But my second book that I have just adored, and I really have to thank Tom. I was hoping he would be on, but the Stanley Tucci memoir. It, as a foodie, love it, love it. I mean, he talks about Julia Child, which I think is like the queen of cooking, you know, the French chef. So it was a fantastic read. I mean, my husband hates reading, he even hates listening to audiobooks, but he got like 10 minutes of the last